A few weeks before the release of Final Fantasy XVI, IGN sat down with Final Fantasy XVI's director Hiroshi Takai and creative director Kazutoyo Maehiro to discuss the side quests in the game. From that interview, the team revealed that side quests in many modern games were becoming too stale, and the team sought out to get rid of the generic side quests that populate most AAA game releases. We didn't want to have something like an NPC telling you, "Go and slay 3 monsters. Thanks." We have grown tired of such side quests, so we wanted a good reason for each side quest that was implemented. We wanted them to tell the player more about the game's world and characters. I'm confident that players won't be bored by them. Well, yeah, about that. Let's get one thing straight. Final Fantasy XVI has a ton of side quests, like north of 60, in fact. And while they certainly add length to the game for those completionists out there, it is clear that the team at Square Enix mostly failed to properly execute meaningful quests that provide players with enriching lore and enticing rewards. Therein lies the problem that most AAA games featuring side quests have. Problem that Final Fantasy XVI clearly failed to overcome. If you want to hear more about the interview about the side quests in Final Fantasy XVI, I've provided the link to that video, along with IGN's article in the description. I am a fan of Final Fantasy XVI. In fact, I really love this game. I think it does so many things right that other linear story-driven games fail to do. This game has an amazing main campaign, punctuated with truly exceptional acting, dramatic scenes that make us down in the dumps when things go south, and triumphant ones that make us raise our fists in the air when the epic events ensue. The combat is excellent, straightforward, accessible for those new to action games, and deep and customizable enough to accommodate a variety of playstyles when tinkering with how to topple the game's beasts and bosses the fastest. Although it is often questioned whether this game is indeed an RPG, the bottom line is that Final Fantasy XVI is a solid and successful mainline Final Fantasy game, having sold millions of copies since release. Yet, with all that said, there are indeed some massive flaws with the game that should be mentioned here. The biggest letdown with this title to me rests in the game's incredible amount of side quests. Around the 5-hour mark, these green exclamation bubbles appear seemingly everywhere, and upon completing what seems like each story mission thereafter, a half dozen more pop up in their stead. For a team who so clearly wanted to change how side quests function in AAA games, it pains me to report that the vast majority of the side quests in Final Fantasy XVI are complete filler with no real benefit to completing them. There are only so many gill bugs and bloody hides that we can pack in our satchels. Yet it seems like the rewards on offer here just don't justify the means to partake in them in the first place, when all you're getting is the same loot over and over again. When there is more quantity than quality on offer here in the game's side quests, that is certainly not a good thing. When nearly 90% of the side quests revolve around helping NPCs out by slaying monsters in an area to obtain item X to retrieve, the very trap that the team was trying to avoid, being the "go and slay 3 monsters thanks" trope that is oh so common in side quests these days, was walked into so clumsily here like a moth to a flame. It also pains to see that not much effort went into the character animation in these side quests at all. Their stiff and expressionless faces add to the monotony you are about to partake in with these side quests, to be clear. So, while many of these quests on offer did result in falling into completely generic and predictable questing tropes, like slaying X amount of monsters, retrieving X numbers of herbs, and talking to X numbers of people to help defuse a heated situation, to Square Enix's credit, most of these side quests did shed some insight into how bleak and unrelenting the world of Valisthea is, particularly on the bearers. These quests did do a good job in reinforcing the central idea of Clive uniting these bearers together and making a safe haven in which both bearer and non-bearer alike could coexist peacefully without conflict. It's just a shame that these quests couldn't go about telling these stories in ways that greatly reward the player with meaningful content in the process of fulfilling these quests. In this very same interview, game director Hiroshi Takai remarked, quote, "I believe we have a lot of variety in our side quests. That being said, while there are a lot of them, we didn't want any of them to feel unnecessary," end quote. Upon completing the game with all the side quests completed, this is exactly what I feel seems to be the disconnect here between what the team says and what the players actually experience. There is not a lot of variety when nearly all of the quests fall into the three categories of defeat X number of monsters, retrieve X number of herbs or items, or talk to X number of people, with any number of these combinations making up these quests. This highlights a glaring fault in Final Fantasy XVI. The complete lack of minigames, the lack of completely optional areas to explore, and the lack of systems present in the side quests that in some way influence or affects the events of the main campaign. Let's look to previous Final Fantasy games to see where Final Fantasy XVI could have benefited from in the minigame department. Final Fantasy XV had a fishing minigame that provides clear buffs and rewards that had direct ties with the story, but also could aid in the recipe crafting that resulted in buffing the player and the party for future encounters. With many bearers and settlements referencing the food that they catch and fish up, a fishing minigame could have fit wonderfully here to add some needed variety. Final Fantasy VII had the chocobo breeding and chocobo racing. Final Fantasy X had Blitzball, a minigame deeply woven into the game's story that made sense with the narrative. These are but a few examples of minigames in Final Fantasy games, and while some may not like them, they added variety that made sense in the otherwise bleak worlds these games existed in. Valisthea is incredibly bleak, and the developers stated that no minigames would be included in Final Fantasy XVI due to the minigames not lining up with Clive's motivations and aspirations. Clive certainly is an ambitious person, but considering much of the game is centered around Cid's hideaway and helping out other bearers, there could easily be quests that promote minigames that help reinforce what Clive ultimately wants to see in the world around him. Playing card games with the various children at Cid's hideaway or the numerous settlements littered throughout Valisthea, akin to Gwent from The Witcher 3 or Triple Triad from Final Fantasy VIII, is a no-brainer here, as Clive has shown keen interest in helping children throughout the length of Final Fantasy XVI. Heck, chocobos are very prevalent here in Final Fantasy XVI, so why not have chocobo races present as an activity the hideout occasionally engages in to take their mind off the chaos and trauma going on around them? As far as the optional areas, I feel God of War Ragnarok is really the king of this, by introducing to players huge swaths of the realm's maps that are completely optional to explore, yet are ripe with side quests that not only offer up great rewards, but also some incredible story moments that complement the tone of the main narrative, while even surpassing it at times. I'll never forget traveling off to the crater in Vanaheim after being gifted this mystical flying vessel from completing a main quest. This completely optional area opens up a massive part of the game that is chock full of incredible side quests and optional boss encounters that rival even some of the campaign's best moments. Having something like this in Final Fantasy XVI would have been incredible and very much worthwhile. The team at Square Enix were so laser focused on making sure the side quests felt congruent with Clive's motivations that they looked at these side missions with blinders, effectively blocking out avenues deemed unnecessary that ultimately would have paid off big time in the end. At the end of the day, players want side quests where the journey is as rewarding as the rewards that are presented after the quest completion. While the vast majority of the game's quests are completely bogged down with repetitive means to complete them, most of the stories they tell are memorable and complement the tone of the game brilliantly, although certainly become redundant as the same old themes keep coming up time and time again. Although very much falling into the find this person and kill these monsters trope, one of the most poignant of these fetch quests was a quest called Playthings, in which Clive was tasked with helping a non-bearer young girl named Lisette track down and retrieve what could most be interpreted as an animal. Upon questioning a nearby villager about the whereabouts of this missing figure, we learn that this thing is regarded as a disgusting pet that should be tied up after the little girl is done playing with it to prevent it from roaming the larger pastures of farmland. It is at this point where the player probably assumes we are tasked with retrieving some cattle or something. Well, we eventually come across Chloe, who happens to be a deceased bearer, face down next to a nearby windmill. Lisette, seemingly annoyed that Chloe turned to crystal and passed away, reveals to Clive that she has had several other bearer playthings that have turned to crystal, and the horrifying revelation that this girl had been told by her parents that bearers don't have their own parents, and thus have no family that will mourn the loss of them. We come to find out that bears do in fact have parents, but their parents typically give them away, as bears are largely ridiculed and trampled on, used solely for their powers to channel the crystal's energy to help the lives of their non-bearer masters. This quest firsthand tells us the innocence that children have regarding bears and the cruel life imposed upon them. Upon realizing the horrifying ways these playthings have been abused, Lisette comes to terms with the life and humanity that is robbed from these bearers as she mourns the loss of a fellow human being. A human being that could have lived a much more prosperous and happy life under different circumstances. There are dozens upon dozens of quests that tell stories like this exceptionally well, and while it is unfortunate that the gameplay here in these quests are as mundane as they get, the world building they can provide is solid and worthwhile, only if you don't care much about the quest rewards and want that 100% completion. While this quest falls into the category of about 90% of the quests out there, being mundane and completely redundant in the gameplay department while offering some insight into the lives and events taking place in Valisthea, there are some side quests that are absolutely worth checking out. These 10% of quests do a great job with adding to the game's story that, although feature some very mundane gameplay to them, greatly reward the player upon completing them. These are the good ones. Just want to issue a spoiler warning here for those who may not want to know the rewards for the quests I'm about to mention. Refer to the timestamp to return to the spoiler-free content at your pleasure, but for those wanting to know which side quest to prioritize for some serious character upgrades with some great stories, here is a list of the quest names and their accompanying rewards. These quests are in the order of their availability. The White-Winged Wonder is essential for those wanting a chocobo mount. Definitely prioritize this one. The Root of the Problem increases consumable and potion potency. Blacksmith's Blues 2 rewards the player with the Excalibur Design Draft, an excellent mid-game weapon. Weird Science increases the carrying capacity for consumables, increasing your number of potions, which is definitely handy. Blacksmith's Blues 3 gives players the Ouroboros Design Draft, adding some much-needed defense. Please Sir, Can I Have Some Marble increases the carrying capacity for consumables again. Blacksmith's Blues 4 presents Clive the Götterdämmerung Design Draft, one of the best weapons in the game. Even Weirder Science gives Clive increased consumable and potion potency. And Trading Places 2 offers a good amount of EXP, Gil, AP, and Renown. Most of these quests contain some awesome storylines that shed insight into many of the game's greatest supporting cast members, while also rewarding the player with essential upgrades. In general, the rule of thumb is definitely prioritize the side quests from the supporting cast at Cid's Hideaway for awesome upgrades and meaningful story bits. While my opinion on the side quests in Final Fantasy XVI are not that great, this is just my opinion at the end of the day. I still very much had an incredible time with the game, and think this Final Fantasy does so many things right and better than most. Featuring an incredible story, great active time lore system, epic battles, and fun maps to explore and get lost in with an exceptional New Game Plus mode, Final Fantasy XVI has a lot for a lot of people. Now, I want you to let me know in the comments what your thoughts are regarding the game's side quests. Do you like them more or less than I did? What do you think of the quests and how they stack up against the other AAA games out there? Let me know in the comments. Watch this video for the real reason why a vocal minority believes Final Fantasy XVI ruined Final Fantasy, and stay tuned for more Final Fantasy content coming up real soon. Thank you all for your continued support, and I'll see you next time.